Up, guys? What's up, guys? Well, I was going to say happy Saturday, but I don't need to do all that. So, I have been promising to do a book review of Jada Pinkett Smith's Worthy, and I started reading the book at the top of the week. I am actually at chapter 11, the beginning of part three, I think it is. And so I realized that it's a lot longer than I expected. And so I'm kind of halfway through it, but I wanted to do at least a chunk of it. I didn't want to try to do the whole thing in one sitting. I realized that it's going to take too long to do that. So I decided that I would do it in two parts, or at least two parts. So this is part one. I don't think there's going to be very many. Well, if you don't read the book, there may be some spoilers, but I feel like a lot of it is stuff that we've heard before. Um, and so really just wanted to share my thoughts. I also wanted to look at it from a couple of different perspectives because I realized as I was reading the book, I had a lot of different thoughts and I found myself having to kind of check my expectations in some areas at some points throughout the book. So before I get into my review, have to do I guess a couple of little disclaimers. One, I listened to the book because the book itself hasn't come in yet, and so I ordered the book ready to read it through, read the actual book. But I also got it on Audible as well, so that I can listen to it and read it. I didn't get the book in yet because there was like a delivery issue, and so now the book isn't coming in until tomorrow. And I didn't want to wait till tomorrow to do the review, so that I can have the book and kind of have it in hand. So I decided to just kind of go in with my review now, and tomorrow I'm sure I'll have the book and I can talk more about it, or show it and all that stuff in my second review. So that's the first disclaimer. The second disclaimer is I did do Will Smith's book as well. I didn't do a review on his book, but his book is somewhere on my bookshelf and it's nowhere that I can just reach it and grab for it, I don't think. But I did his book review, or not his review, but I did read his book. And I found that there were quite a few similarities, particularly in the pattern of writing, which I thought was interesting. So I'll probably talk a little bit about that. And there are some things that were, like I said, just in a pattern of writing that I couldn't really contribute to the book being similar because of the era and the time, or because I would imagine that Jada probably used his book a little bit as a blueprint to write her book, which isn't unlikely. That definitely is a possibility. So that's the second disclaimer. So I share that to say that in comparison to Will's book, I enjoyed his book a lot better. I'll say that so far anyway. So starting from the beginning, she talks about, I guess, about to go to this new, um, I guess, like healer, like medicine healer or something like that. And she's at the bottom of the lady's driveway, and she's debating whether or not to go in. And she kind of shares, her feelings as she's preparing to go, take this journey to this woman's, up to her house and go through this new process of, I guess, healing, spiritual healing. And she kind of shares where her mind state was. She talks about having, um, suicidal ideation and, thinking that if she just go off the cliff, that might be easier and all this. So this is kind of where she starts the book or starts her story. And then she takes a step back and she goes kind of to the beginning, where she was raised and what that experience was. She talks about being raised, by her mom. I think her mom got pregnant with her at like 17, I think. And I think her mom and dad, I can't remember if I think they did get married, but they quickly got divorced. So her dad ended up, moving to California, starting a whole nother family. And so she essentially was raised by her mom. Um, and her grandparents were very involved in her life as well as other family members. I realized while I was listening to the story that like her voice was really annoying to me, which is really crazy. Well, it was crazy because I didn't expect it. I think like most people, I came into this story a little biased. Um, and to be honest, I wasn't buying it. I found myself, listening to her tell the story, and I just was like, I don't believe it. Like everything that I was reading, I was like, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I don't buy that. It just didn't feel believable. It felt very um like very fantastical, kind of like like storytelling, but it just didn't feel real. So, for example, she would say stuff and it just didn't. For me, it didn't line up. It didn't make sense. So, and this is why I can't wait to get the book because I need to go back and kind of really like, did I hear that correctly or did I miss something? So at one point she talks about like her grandmother, who I believe she says was, I think her parents passed while she was really the grandmother's parents passed when she was young. But then she talked about her grandmother having like going to, getting going to college and then doing this extensive travel and all this stuff. And I wasn't clear like where the funds and resources for that came from. So, according to her, grandmother was very well traveled. And she would bring, Jada all these different trinkets back from her travels that she still has to this day. Like some of them she still has to this day. But like most grandparents, her grandmother was very instrumental in her upbringing. And so she dropped a lot of nuggets throughout the years. So while she was talking about like her family dynamics, of course, it was, pretty interesting because I think a lot of people can relate, to the dynamics of a traditional, well, not even a traditional, the dynamics of a family growing up in inner city, whatever, during the 70s and during the 80s. So all of that was I could really relate to. And so I kind of enjoyed her telling that part of the story. Um, One of the things I didn't have to take a quick step back, but one of the things I feel like even in her introduction or her not her introduction, but like her thank yous, she really attributed a lot of her um like her will and drive to live and to be and all that stuff. She really attributes that to her children. Even Trey, which is her stepson, I guess. So she kind of opens up and kind of gives them all a, thank you for, your love and your support. And I thought it was interesting that she didn't mention Will in that. Again, I have to get the book to see maybe I missed something. So I thought that was really interesting. Throughout the story, and of course, she's starting from when she was young, moving, until her adult years. I think she doesn't mention Will, I think, until like chapter 10, I think, if I remember correctly. So she doesn't mention him until like chapter 10, which I thought was peculiar as well. Maybe I just kind of went into it thinking that she was going to mention him earlier, particularly in her thank yous or whatever. But she doesn't. Nonetheless, she kind of shares a lot of, her upbringing in Baltimore City and the different experiences that she has. She talks about one incident where she would one incident where she was I guess selling drugs, and that part really wasn't believable for me either. She talked about wanting to be her own, make her own money and do her own thing. So that whole section of that I was just like I just didn't buy it, wasn't believing it at all. When she talks about Tupac, and I think this is the part that's kind of really interesting to me. When she talks about Tupac, she is it's very clear that she has great admiration for him. But what I find is that like Tupac's been gone for almost 30 years. He's been gone for at least, I think he got killed in 90, what was it, 90, maybe 96? It was either like 94 or 96, and I don't even have my phone to check it. But he's been almost gone for like 30, between 25 and 30 years he's been gone. And I think where she's at this state is that there's just this, how do you say, like this fantasy of what he could have been or what he was. Um because I think about my friends that I've had when we were kids, you recognize that life goes on, and people change and situations change and life circumstances change. Like very rarely do you have a friend that's been your friend since you were in high school, right? And then all the way into adulthood. So I think the fact that Tupac's life was cut so tragically short, I think she's kind of in this still fantasy world of what their relationship was and what it could have been and what it would have been today. And I find that a little alarming. Not even alarming, concerning. So that was one of the things. So when she talks about Tupac is very much in this fantastical kind of way, that it doesn't feel realistic. It doesn't feel like she's really considering, the you know what time would have done, for that relationship. So I think that's a big, that was a big issue that I kind of ran into. Well, a big concern that I had reading the book. And she talks a lot about Tupac. I mean, she talks a lot about Tupac. Um, and the way she talks about him, even in her tone and her voice, is just like, oh my God. It was like, it's just so, like I said, fantastical. Um, I realized, like when I first started listening to it, I was like, ooh, I don't think I'm gonna be able to do this because I realized that I was really listening to it, like just not believing it. And so I had to kind of take a step back and say, all right, let me just listen to it for what it is, accept the story for what it is, and just have whatever feelings about it that I have about it. I I don't think that she I don't think that she did, like, I don't think it was like a really good book as far as writing goes. She shared her stories and that was fine, but it wasn't I can't let me say. She shared her story and it was fine, but all the stories kind of felt like something was missing, and I think the element for me that was missing was her. So, it's almost like you're telling a story, but you're telling it from everybody else, and you're not really putting yourself into it, and I think that's kinda how I felt about it, that she was not really putting herself in the story, but she was kinda telling it from this, out here kinda space. So, for example, she would share something that feels very like you could tell a really impactful story about. She shared this one story where, when she was selling drugs, she was robbed at gunpoint, and something like that where it could have been really like drawing you in as a reader, as a listener. It just fell flat in the way that it was being told. And so I don't know if that was a part of it. So I'm curious to read it to see if I can, transpose her voice for something else and really kind of be more, um, I don't know, more in the story. So I think maybe part two, I'll talk a little bit about that. Um, when I really started appreciating the story, like she talked about again, growing up in Baltimore. She talked a little bit about her mother and her struggle with addiction. She talked about her mother's marriage to her dad, who she didn't have a huge relationship with, but then she ended up going to California. I think he moved to California with his new family. So she ended up going to California, kind of got that experience, came back to Baltimore, kind of, seeing the world a little bit different. So she talks about that. And she talks about her mother starting to date someone else who I think was a lawyer. And so, she kind of talked about the dynamics of that relationship. He was a great role model and father figure to her. So she talked a little bit about that and what that relationship looked like. And then I think after her grandmother passed, her mother and I think his name was Tony, they ended up getting divorced, and her mother, who had already been, I think, dabbling with drugs, had then at that point kind of, spiraled and got a little more addicted, I guess, once her mom passed and once her and Tony got divorced. So she talked about the dynamics of that, and she talked about like the relationship that she had with her mom. Um, and I guess because her mom was so young when she had her, it was almost like a sister relationship. So even when she's talking about her mother, she'll say stuff like Adrian. And when she talked about her dad, she uses his name, and I can't remember his name, but she, would use his name and not say dad. But there was one story that she shared where she was sitting on a step with her mom, and one of her friends came up in like this BMW something something or another, or was it a Mercedes? Anyway, some fancy foreign car. Now this is in the 80s. He comes up and Jada, her mom, sitting on the step, and this friend says, "Hey, come on, take a ride with me." And she's like, "Oh, that's a nice car." And she asked her mom, like, "I'm going to take a ride with him. Do you want anything?" And her mom's like, "Oh, bring me some fries back from the store or whatever." And so she says she gets in a car, and as soon as they get down the road, the cops pull them over, and or the cops, starts flashing, and then they take off, and the cops goes through this long chase or whatever. And the guy kind of tells her, like, all right, get out, they lost the cops or whatever. And the guy's like, get out the car and, run that way. Very reminiscent of Set It Off. So she gets out the car and she go run and hides in somebody's backyard or whatever. And she, pretends that she didn't know the car was stolen and all that stuff. But nonetheless, the cops end up picking her up. I think her mom came and got her. She didn't really get into very much trouble with that. But it was stories like that, like about her childhood, that just really felt unbelievable. Um, and there were other stories similarly that just kind of felt like unbelievable. Like I think the story of her getting held up felt unbelievable. She told a story about, cashing a check and then getting robbed. That I can see that happening, but it was, I don't know. I don't know if it was the way she told it or it just some of it felt unbelievable. So that was the first part of it where I was just kind of like, like when she was talking about her upbringing, just didn't really feel that believable. Then she talked about like her relationship with Tupac and how they ended up kissing just to see, and both of them was like, like you're like the sister, and they, so there was no romantic relationship there. Um, and she kind of, leaves it at that, but she says that, but she loved him very much, but not in a romantic way. I'm trying to think where to jump to. So then she talks about going off to college. I think she spent like a semester in college, and yeah, she spends a semester in college, and then she tells her mom, like, look, and this is unbelievable too. She tells her mom, like, I don't think I need to go to college to pursue acting. Like, either I can go to California and pursue my dreams, or I'm going to go to law school. And I was like, where did law school thing come from? Because there was nothing else within the story even building up to this point that gave any indication that she was interested in going to law school or even that her parents wanted her to go to law school. Um, so I was like, where did that come from as an option? And so she says her mother was like, okay, well, go to California, give yourself, I forget how much time she told her to give herself, and, see what happens. So she's like, at this point, Tupac had already left Baltimore and his family had moved to California. So I guess when she got to California, they reconnected. Um, so she kind of talks about, her reconnecting with him. The parts where I really found myself interested, and when I really was like, okay, yeah, like she is, like she's the real deal. And I kind of took a different perspective is once she got to Hollywood and she talked about how she wasn't Hollywood, she wasn't interested in being Hollywood. And she was like really, kind of just peeping the game of how, come on, sweetie. She was really peeping it. Baby, don't sit on me though. She was really like kind of, peeping how people act and, in LA and how it was so opposite from her. She also talked about how when she got there, she used to drink a lot. I don't know that I think she used to smoke weed a lot and hang out a lot. And I think she said she took like pills at some point or whatever. But she was like, used to party a lot. That was kind of what she did. And she said when she would drink, she would be a little belligerent or whatever, which isn't uncommon. So she talked a little bit about that. But it was a part I was going to tell you guys about. Um, but yeah, so when she talked about like her journey into Hollywood and how she got her first or her first TV role and things like that, how she got her first agent, I thought was a really cool story. The people that she met when she got there, she told this story about meeting Keenan Ivory Wayans, and she was like, "You should let me be a fly girl." And he was like, "No, I think you got more talent and just not more talent, but you have a different path than just being a dancer on a show. Like follow your path." And she said that he, recommended that she get an agent and all that stuff. And she was like, "Well, can I use your name?" And he was like, "Yeah," And so she reached out to this agent that he had recommended, and that ended up being her agent at the time. And just talk about all the doors that was opening. And at this point, I was kind of like, man, I literally paused the recording to just kind of think about like honestly, hands down, Jada Pinkett Smith has been in some of my favorite movies of all times. Obviously, Set It Off was one of my favorite movies of all times. The Inkwell was one of my favorite movies of all time. Low Down Dirty Shame. I was just like going down the list. Menace to Society, Jason's Lyrics, and I'm just like going down the list of all the movies that she was in. And I was like, man, like she really was a great, I don't want to say a great actress, but she was on her path, right, to do some great work. And I just thought that was really cool to take a step back because I think with all of the stuff that's been going on with them for the past few years, I think we forget that she was a formidable actress who had played in some really good roles and some really good movies. And so I wanted to kind of keep a focus on that. And that really kind of putting it in that perspective, not to mention the Matrix movies. So when I put it in that perspective, it really helped me to start looking at her differently and then also just appreciating her story. And so this is where it kind of turned for me, where I went from just kind of giving it the side eye to really like, no, let me give this a chance because she's been through some stuff and she shared so many different experiences with some well-known, actors and actresses and just the different relationships she had. Like she talked about her relationship with MC Light and how they have been friends for many years. She talked about her relationship with Keenan Ivory Wayans. She talked about her relationship with Eddie Murphy, not to forget Nutty Professor, the fact that she was in that. She talked about her relationship with Eddie Murphy, and these are just friendships, like people who were like big brothers to her, who helped to um, encourage her and motivate her and just drop nuggets that helped her in her career and her career decisions. So it's really cool listening to that part of her story. Where she's at right now, where I am at right now with the story, she just met Will. She talked about how like her first meeting with Will was he wanted her to play his girlfriend in A Fresh Prince. So Dwayne Martin was her friend, and Dwayne Martin was Will's friend separately. And so Dwayne Martin reached out to her and was like, "Hey, my friend Will wants to meet with you." And they were doing a movie. They were doing The Inkwell down in North Carolina. She's like, "My friend Will wants to meet with you. He's coming into town. He wants to meet." And she's like, "Sure." And so Will came and pitched to her to do to play his girlfriend on A Fresh Prince. And at this point, she had already done, I think, Menace to Society. And so she moved from the different world to really doing, to doing movies. And her thinking was, I don't, move from television to movies, and I don't want to go back to television. And so she was like, for that reason, she kind of turned Will down for that role. And he was like, "Okay, cool," and that was pretty much it. But I thought it was cool too how she talked about, just thinking about some of the people who helped push her along her path. She talked about Debbie Allen. She talked about going in for the reading of one of the characters on A Different World. And she said she went in, it was like a one-time episode of a girl who I think was had AIDS, and she was going to play that character. And when she came in for the read, Debbie Allen was like, "No, I think I want to do something different with you." And so she created the character of Lena James for Jada. And I thought that was so cool. Um, and so she did that, and she was like, and once A Different World was kind of wrapping up their final season, that's when a movie opportunity for Menace to Society came to her. And that came to her through Tupac. So Tupac was working with the Hughes brothers, I think it is, to do Menace to Society. And he was like, "Oh, I want Jada to be in that with me." And so he, brings Jada in, and Jada, he's like, "You're going to do this movie." So he brings Jada in. She, goes out for the movie. They give her the movie, and then Tupac ends up getting out of the movie because he got into it with the Hughes brothers or somebody. So they end up not using him in the movie. And she was like, "Well, if you're not going to do it, I'm not going to do it." He's like, "No, you're going to do it," and like that's it. So she ends up doing a movie, which was a great movie. Um, and so she was like, when she got the movie, of course, she was on A Different World, and Debbie Allen was like, I guess the way her contract was written up, she wasn't supposed to be able to do anything else. And she was like, Debbie Allen was like, "Nope, let me worry about that." So Debbie Allen, I guess, talked with the producers or whatever, and was like, "No, I want, we're in our final season, and I want her to be able to go and do this." And so they released her, not really released her, but gave her or allowed her to do A Different World and go out and do the filming for Menace to Society. And so I thought that was really cool. But nonetheless, she does Menace to Society. Will tries to get her to play the role of his girlfriend on The Fresh Prince of Bel Air. If you're a fan, you know that Nia Long was the one who played that character. Um, and then, Jada went on to do Menace to Society and then all the other movies that came after that. Um, so when she talks about her career, for me, that's when it was kind of like, oh, like you really do forget amidst all the other, craziness, you really do forget the fact that, yeah, she was an up and coming actress who has some real work behind her. Um, and I really appreciate that. I think that's where I got to the place where it was just like the respect level was like I had to check my bias and like really respect her journey. Um, of course, then she meets Will again. I think she said one of her friends had threw her a birthday party for her 21st birthday. She meets Will again. He's at her birthday party, and he's just kind of like, "Happy birthday." She's like, "Thanks," but they really never really connect. And then she talks about going through this bout with depression. And she has like this full on panic attack. And she calls her mother and she calls MC Light and she calls another one of her friends and all of them come, fly in from wherever they were, kind of fly in and be by her side and really help her walk through, that dark period. And she's like, and during that time, she became like a real recluse. And she says Dwayne Martin reached out to her and was like, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. Think you're trying to hide out from me. I'm near your neighborhood having dinner with my girlfriend at the time, Tisha Campbell, and come out and meet us. And she was just kind of like she really didn't want to go. But she knew that because he was so close, he wouldn't take no for an answer. She was like, if I would have said no, I'm sure he would have came to my house. And she was like, so it was like a walking distance. So she just walked over and met with him and Tisha and, had dinner. And he was like, oh, yeah. And Will Smith, my friend will probably join us. And so she was like, Will came. And that's when she really kind of got to sit down and talk with him, just like on a whole nother, kind of experience him on another level. And she was like, she was really um, surprised that he wasn't like the goofy guy that she thought he was, like, watching him on television or whatever. She was like, but he was really thoughtful and he had ideas about things. He was very charismatic, very smart. And she said she really enjoyed that. And she said and they talked for like hours, just the four of them, talk for a long time. And so then she says after that, Will called her. She's like, she was walking through the mall with her mom, and the phone rings, and it's Will, and she's like, hey, she said she was excited that he called, um, and her mom was like, who's that? She's like, Will Smith. Her mother was like, kind of gave her a look, and she was like, you don't need to be talking to him. He's married. Like at the time, he was married. She's like, I know, ma, I know. And so she was like, he was just like, hey, just calling her or whatever. And she was like, well, yeah, my mom said I don't need to be talking to you because you're married. And he was like, "Oh, I don't mean any disrespect or whatever." So, he's kind of like, I don't mean any disrespectful, mean any disrespect. So they get off the call or whatever, and she's like, and she didn't talk to him again for like over a year. Um, and then I think Will went through his divorce with, well, was going through a divorce with his son's mom, Cherie, I think her name is. They were going through a divorce, and then Will reached out to Jada. And at this point, they started hanging out, and this is where I'm coming towards the end of where I am right now. So at this point, they start hanging out, and then Will and Cherie decides that they want to try and work on it. She was like, she was devastated because she had fallen in love with him at this point, but she was super devastated. So they got back together for a brief amount of time. Then they realized that no, we're going to pursue the divorce. So they end up, pursuing their divorce. But obviously, they were still, great co-parents. And she talked about like one Thanksgiving. Um, Will was on the phone with Cherie's family, and she was pissed off, and she had been drinking, and she's like, if y'all getting divorced, why are you on the phone with her, in the background or whatever. And he's like, what are you doing, so she was just kind of showing like the dynamics of, I guess, their earlier years of, being together. And then she talked about like where I'm at right now is when she talks about um finding out that she's pregnant. And she says it like, she found out she was pregnant like immediately. Like immediately, like soon as they rolled over, she was like, I'm pregnant. And so he kind of clowned her about that. But sure enough, she was pregnant. Um, and let me see, it was another part that I wanted to take a step back. So, like I said, she talked a lot about her relationship with Tupac. And she talked about when he got in trouble for the the rape allegations and had to go to court for that. She talked about how she really wanted to be there for him and help him and support him. She talked about how she felt with regards to him signing with Suge Knight, and she was like, "Don't do that." Like she thought it was a horrible idea because Suge didn't have the best reputation. She talked about a relationship that not a relationship like physical relationship, but a friendship that she had with Easy E, which I thought was like, wow, that's interesting. And she talked about that she met Easy E while speaking on a panel at something had to do with hip hop, some kind of hip hop panel. She was speaking on that panel, and she talked about like the misogyny in hip hop music or rap music. And so her and Easy got a chance to talk off stage, and they kind of formed a friendship. He invited her to come out. I think he was doing something in his community. He invited her to come out. She talked about how smart he was and how smart of a businessman he was. Um, and how, when he got sick, she was just like, I'm going to come see you. He was like, well, no, you ain't got to come see me. I'm about to get out anyway or whatever. So she said she never went up there to see him. And, lo and behold, he ended up passing away really quickly. So she kind of talked about that. And even as I'm thinking about that, she talked about he was in a hospital and she wanted to go see him, but she didn't get around to it. And he was like, no, I'll be going home soon anyway. But then she also talked about when he found out that he had HIV, the fact that he came out and went public with it. And I don't remember the details of that. I do vaguely remember when Easy E was, diagnosed with HIV or full blown AIDS, and he did like a press conference. I vaguely remember that. So she kind of shared like where she was within a relationship with him or the dynamics of their relationship at that point. But nonetheless, he ended up being in a hospital and she didn't visit him. And she regretted that she didn't go visit him. Um, what else? There was another part that I wanted to talk about. Okay, so that was her relationship with Easy E. Then she talked about, like I said, when Tupac was arrested and the whole dynamics of him. Well, she talked about when he got shot first when he was set up. That was a whole interesting story as well. When he was set up at the movie, music studio, and he ended up getting shot in New York, and all the dynamics that came with that. Around the same time as when he had to go to court for the rape allegations, and so she talked about, his mom called her, and she immediately came out to New York, and I guess went to court and all that stuff. Um, and then when Tupac eventually got arrested for those allegations and, the fact that he was, like, in Rikers Island, she thought that was, like, crazy. Um, I guess awaiting I have to go back and listen because now as I'm talking about it, a lot of the timeline stuff just kinda doesn't make sense. Like, I know he was in Rikers Island, and I don't know if he was in Rikers Island awaiting sentencing, perhaps, maybe that's what it was, but then once he got sentenced, they sent him to another, jail, I think somewhere in Jersey, I think it was. Um, so she talked a lot about that, and then this is where he said that he's going to, get on death row because he felt like I guess he didn't have money and a lot of stuff was happening with the money and nobody was trying to put up bail or bond for him. And so he ended up, going to death row and Suge Knight ended up, I guess, putting up the bail or bond or whatever. And so now he, comes out and she was like, and she could tell that he was really bitter. And so they were really kind of beefing between because of that, because she felt like he should be doing more to support, to, pull back from the East Coast, West Coast beef that was going on, but she felt like he was really fueling that. Um, and so, she had words with him about that. And this is where she said that they, kind of got into a big blow up. They were at a restaurant and, he was just like, you're getting all Hollywood or whatever. The way when she talks about their dynamics just always felt kind of like just unbelievable for me. And maybe it was just the embellishing of the conversation because the way she would talk about it was like, and then I said, and then he said, and then I said, and then he said. And I think a lot of times reality is you don't remember conversations verbatim. You remember the context of the conversations, but not what I said and he said and I said and he said throughout this long dialogue. So I think that's the part that kind of lost me a little bit. But nonetheless, they kind of have a blow up. Tupac leaves, and she's like, and she never thought that that would be like the last time that they would talk because her position was, I'm not going to apologize to him. He needs to apologize to me, and that's it. Um, then she talked about, fast forward a year later is when he ends up getting shot in Las Vegas, and his mother calls her, and she's like, "Well, I'm going to come." And his mom's like, "Well, no, he's still in a coma, but when he gets better, I think she was doing something." And the mother was like, "When you finish that, then come, and you can get to see him then." And, she was like, "All right, well, I'm gonna come as soon as," you know. Um, and what I found interesting too, just a little side note, is during this time, she talked about dating someone who was in the industry. She said, a lot of times when you're meeting people in the industry, is like their agent, connects with your agent and, connects the two of you at that point. So I think whoever this person is, and I hate that she didn't name who this person is. But she says, this person who, I guess was a big name in Hollywood. She didn't say whether he was an actor, an athlete, or whatever, but he was someone who had an agent, and their agent reached out to her agent and said this person was interested in her. So they ended up going on a date, and I guess kind of dating. But she said the guy was very, what's the word? What is the word? Controlling. And so they had a couple of incidents where she was like, really red flags where she's seen that this guy was really controlling. Um, to the point where at one point she said she was like in a car and she was like, "Yeah, I need to go see Tupac." And the guy's like, "Oh, you gonna leave me to go see some other, you know?" And she was like, "That's my brother. Like it ain't even the same. Like that's my brother. You know, he was shot and I need to go check on him." And so the guy, I guess, had, he had a friend in the back of the car and, the guy acted whatever. So she ends up jumping out of the car and running to this guy's house and going and do the slide door and grabbed a knife and was in the closet and um the guy came and she was just like, "I know it's nothing I can do. Like he's bigger than me. He was, had muscles and all this stuff." And so she talks about trying to run. And when she ran out of I guess she was in the guest room's closet or his son's closet, his child's closet. And so she's like, so she runs out of the closet and trying to run to the front door, but he came out. And so now they're like on a standoff. He's standing in front of the door. She's not able to get out, but she has like this big butcher knife where it's like, don't come near me kind of thing. And she's like, and the guy's like, "You think I'm gonna hurt you?" Like, so that whole story, I wish she would have said who that person is. Like, yeah, just say who it is. But nonetheless, she ended up getting her assistant to get her. She ended up staying there till the next day because she was like, "I'm not going to be able to fly out till tomorrow." So I guess things kind of smoothed over for the night. She the next day was like, "Yeah, I need to fly out to go to the East Coast," and I think it was something having to do with Spike Lee. Had a movie or something. So she's like, "I'm heading over to the East Coast." And the guy was like, "I'm not going to see you again. I'm not going to see you ever again, right? Am I?" Or whatever. And she was just kind of like, probably not. And needless to say, she kind of, didn't date that guy anymore. But I wish she would have said who that was. Um, then, she goes, and as we all know, Tupac ends up dying. Um, and so she was devastated, which, as you can imagine. One of the things I did really recognize, just from a human perspective, is that she did have a lot of loss. And I don't know, like she talked about, obviously, Tupac passing away. She talked about like one of her first assistants, committing suicide. She talked about Easy E passing away. So there were people that she was relatively close with, her grandmother passing away, people that she was relatively close with that, had passed, and how, I guess, triggering that was for her, and how when you really don't process the grief, how it shows up. So, and how it shows up, and then how that looks as you try to navigate your day to day life. And she kind of uses that as her foundation for how, when her and Will connected, like how she had all of this past trauma that she hadn't dealt with, and how she felt like, I guess, the foundation of their relationship was just based off of these two people who were traumatized through life, or had these traumatic experiences, or this unhealed trauma, these two people coming together, and trying to build a relationship off of that. So fast forward a little bit to, towards the end of where I am right now. She's dating Will. Um, she tells him that she's pregnant. They decide that they want to get married. She's just kind of like, "Let's just go on a mountaintop and get married." And her mother is like, "No, you need to have a wedding. You're my only child." So her mother, and I forget who else, planned her wedding. And so before they end up getting married, Will's people was kind of like, "Hey, you need to have her sign a prenup." And I think this is kind of where she's trying to put the pin in the fact that divorce really isn't an option for them. But his people try to, or recommend or advise that he gets a prenup. And he was like, "Yeah, so people want me to get a prenup." And she was like, "Well, if we're going into marriage already thinking about the end, then I don't think we should get married." And he was like, "Yeah, you're right." She was like, basically like, "I'm not going anywhere," and he was just kind of like, "Yeah, you're right." So they never signed a prenup, according to her. And yeah, so they never signed a prenup. And that's kind of where I ended up, I think, where we're ended now. I don't even think where I'm at right now that they actually got married yet, but that's kind of where I ended. Couple of things that kind of, like I said, had my eyebrow raised was, she talked about when she went to visit Pac in Rikers, and I guess he was really stressed out and a lot of stuff was going on. And she said, he had lost a lot of weight, and he had patches of his hair was gone. And she talked about, he had suffered from alopecia. Like, why she knew that, or like how that became a part of the conversation, I'm not sure. Why she thought that was important to put in her book, I'm not sure. Um, and then it also, I think, bears the question, and I'm not familiar with alopecia. I don't know how it shows up or whatever, but it does beg the question, which a lot of people had, is like, when she said that she has alopecia, is like, did she really? A lot of people just didn't believe the fact that, or believe her when she said that she has alopecia. But I didn't think that it was necessary or even relevant to talk about the fact that Tupac had alopecia. I thought that was kind of weird. Um, I appreciate I appreciate some of the things she talked about where she kind of takes a stance against whatever. So when she was talking about being in Hollywood and how it's just like a fake city, like everything is just so fake, and how she was so anti that. I appreciated that stance. Because of course, a lot of times people kind of go to Hollywood and they fall in line and become this whole Hollywood thing. So I thought that was really interesting. She talked about John Singleton, how he was like, "Oh, you're rough around the edges, like, you need to lose that East Coast accent," and all these different things. And I don't think she ever worked with John Singleton, but every time she got a new job, she would run into him, was like, "See, I'm still working," He was like, "Yeah, but you changing that accent too." So I found it really cool when she talked about the different people that she had met along the way. She shared this other really cool story about one of her friends from Baltimore who was, I'm not gonna say the gang he was in because I don't even want that coming out my mouth, but, he was a part of this gang, and but he was a friend of hers, and she was saying that he had gotten into some legal trouble. So he reached out to her and was like, "Hey, I need you to sign this document saying that we were here," kind of thing. And she was like, "Yeah, absolutely, just let me know what you need me to do." And she said, and she was telling one of her friends, like, "Yeah, homeboy from Baltimore will need me to do da 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 da." And actually, it was a homeboy from Philly who need me to do da 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 da. And she's like, Keenan Ivory Wayans overheard the conversation, and he was like, "You, that's illegal. Like, you will go to jail for, I think, perjury." And she's like, "No, it's not even that serious." He's like, "No, it is that serious. Like, you are on a path. You can't do that. That's illegal. Like, you will go to jail for that." And so she was just saying, like, she appreciate those people who just really was kind of kept it real with her. And Keenan Ivory Wayne, shout out to him, was like very instrumental. Debbie Allen was very instrumental, I think, in her career. Um, Eddie Murphy, like I said, she mentioned, a conversation that she had with him where he was just, really kind of encouraging her in her craft. Um, who else? Who else did she mention? I think those 3 names come to mind immediately, but I think overall, like I said, I started it very biased because her voice was like, "Oh my god, I can't believe what anything that she's saying," but I am absolutely enjoying, like, this part of her story where she's talking about her journey, in Hollywood and all that, really enjoying that because I think it was so important because it does remind you that she, like I said, is a formidable actress who played in some great movies, some great roles, and I think that was, really cool to remind her listeners of that. I think where I am right now, I just started part 3. Yeah, I just started part 3, so it's gonna be a part 2 to this video, this review. But like I said, it was so much that happened. There was no way that I could talk about the whole book in just one sitting. Like right now, it's been 40 minutes, and I'm, still talking about just part 1 and part 2. And I didn't want to do too many parts because I think I would lose interest in doing it, and you guys would probably lose interest in listening. So, do I recommend the story? I think I don't know if I would say I recommend it. Um, I don't know that I would say I would recommend it. I really don't. Do I find it to be as controversial as people are saying? I don't. I don't find it to be as controversial as people are making it out to be. Um, I haven't got to the part where she talks about the fact that her and Will haven't been together or that they've been separated since 2016. I haven't gotten that far. Like I said, I just ended at the fact that I'm getting married or preparing for their wedding. Um, So, what I've read so far, I appreciate it because it did make me have to take a step back. Where at first I was like, "Oh, are you lying?" Like I was listening to it, like, "Mm-mm, she ain't telling the truth. Like that is such a lie. Like, oh my god, why are you exaggerating?" Like started off listening to it like that, but then eventually I was kind of like, "All right, let me see," um, because some of the stories she shared. I think are universal stories. Like growing up in any inner city in the 70s and the 80s, there was just like this whole energy around that, especially on the inner city on the East Coast. There was like this whole energy around that. You had the crack cocaine epidemic, and she touched on that. You had the heroin epidemic of the 70s, and she touched on that. Um, you had hip hop, really kind of coming, into its own, and she touched on that and touched on like what because Jada and I are the same age. And so a lot of the things that she was experiencing in Baltimore, I was experiencing, in Philadelphia. And so it's really cool just and I live here in Maryland now. So a lot of the places that she talked about is like familiar. It's like, oh, I was riding down Reisterstown Road. And I'm like, oh my God, Reisterstown Road. So that's fun, just kind of, connecting in that way. But I don't know. I'm excited about the rest of the story. I would imagine that going forward, I would imagine that maybe she doesn't talk about Tupac as much, but we'll see. I was really uncomfortable, like how she was talking about Tupac, like that was kind of uncomfortable, but again, we'll see where she goes from there. Um, and what else? What else? What else? Yeah, so it's hard to say if I recommend it or not. Like I said at the beginning as well, I think she took a note out of Will's page, especially listening to the book on tape, because he has like music in his as well. And I don't want to make this a review of his book, but he has like one of the stories that he shared in his book Will. He talked about how his parents had wanted him to go off to college and he wanted to, pursue music. And his dad kind of, bartered a deal between him and his mom, was like, all right, he'll get a year to pursue this. And then if you don't, then he'll go to college. And both of them was like, okay, that sounds fair. And so he has this one part in his book where he's talking about, he was working at ice packing. And so he was like, you're scooping the ice and you're putting it in a bag and scooping. It's like this monotonous work. And while he's doing this monotonous work, he's thinking about, like, man, maybe this is what I need to do. Maybe I'll never make it into music. And while he's thinking, they have like the top 10 list of, uh, hip hop's top 10 list, and so they're going down, song number 3, and they'll play, whatever that song was and he's still talking or whatever. And then he's like, he forgot his key or he couldn't find his keys. He was finished, he couldn't find his keys, and they got down to the number one song. And just when he was kind of like, this is, pursuing this hip hop thing is probably not a real dream for me. And he was like, and just as he was kind of, coming to that conclusion, he says, the number one song, everybody's been, been requesting this song by this two new duo or whatever, and it was "Girls Ain't Nothing But Trouble" by Fresh, Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, and he was just, and it, so just the way he told that story, I had literally had goosebumps. It was just like so cool and so dynamic the way he intertwined the music with the storytelling. It was just very, very dope. And so I think Jada took a little bit of that out of his book, because at the end of some of her chapters, she'll play, play a little bit of music or whatever. But another part, and I'll leave on this, another part that I'm kind of struggling with is you're getting this Jada going through her journey, but then at the end of each chapter, she kind of wants to drop a little bit of wisdom. And the wisdom just doesn't line up. It's like because you're not there yet. And so it's like you're taking future Jada who's speaking wisdom to, the past Jada, which I guess could work. But I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. And so another disclaimer is I'm listening to her on the cusp of just finishing Kerry Washington's book. I just had her book sitting next to me. Yeah, just finishing Kerry Washington's book, which was I had comments about that as well, and I didn't do a review, but I had thoughts about that as well. And then I also did Viola Davis's book as well. So coming off of a couple of autobiographies or memoirs, if you will, and then coming to Jada's, I would say hands down, hers is the weakest of all the memoirs that I've taken in this year, and her story is the one that kind of gives me more pause than anybody else's because it just feels very fantastical, like very fairy tale ish. So that took longer than I expected. I thought I was only going to talk about it for about 30 minutes, but I guess because I had to do the setup and all that stuff and my few disclaimers. But that's where I'm at right now. Yeah, that's where I'm at right now. So part 2 will come. Hopefully, I'll get to finish it, and by the next few days, get to finish it, and then I'll come around and do part two. But if you're reading it, please let me know your thoughts. What was some of the stories that you like? What was your overall feeling? What did you feel about like reading the book? Did it feel believable to you? Did it change the way you feel about her? Um, did it leave questions or give you pause? Do you feel like a lot of the controversy or a lot of the backlash that she's getting is warranted? I personally, I don't feel like a lot of it is warranted. I think everybody has a journey, everybody has a story. You do not know the dynamics of their relationship. um, and it's interesting just to hear the story. Do I believe it all? Not necessarily, but I appreciate just the journey. And so I don't think like she warrants all the backlash that she's getting. Whereas before I was kind of looking at her with the side eye too, not gonna lie. But I don't think that it warrants all the backlash that she's getting. So yeah, but I'm curious to know what you guys think. If you're reading it, what are your thoughts? And like I said, part two shall be coming soon. And I felt like there was something else I wanted to share quickly, and it completely it completely escaped me. So hopefully I'll remember it next time. But like I said, I'm gonna finish it, and we'll get to part two in the next couple of days. But let me know your thoughts if you've already checked it out. Yeah, let me know your thoughts. So yeah, so that's my first review of Jada Pinkett Smith's Worthy. And I love the title, and I'll talk more about the title in the next video. So thank you guys for letting me interrupt your day. Thank you for joining me, for those who joined for the live stream. And thank you for those who, watch this in post and like post production. Who will watch this in replay and let me know your thoughts. So blessings to you guys. Thanks for tuning in.